The final item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 4855 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on White Ribbon Campaign 16 Days of Action to Tackle Violence Against Women. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would be grateful if those members who wish to speak in the debate could press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible. Time will be tight in this debate. I call Jamie Hepburn to open the debate. 7 minutes, Mr Hepburn.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I begin by thanking those members who added their names in support of my motion to enable it to be debated this evening. Their support is sincerely appreciated, as is the presence of those members who stay behind to either participate in or watch the debate. I'd also like to thank White Ribbon Scotland for their support in advance of tonight's debate and the invaluable information and guidance they've been able to provide me with to help prepare. I'd also like to thank Zero Tolerance for the briefing they were able to provide members with for this debate. And I know they'll be holding an event in Parliament this Thursday to mark 20 years of activity, which I understand is co-sponsored by Malcolm Chisholm and Christina McKelvey, who I know was disappointed not to be able to take part in tonight's debate. And can I give advance notice of my apologies for not being able to attend that particular event? I do hope it goes well. So White Ribbon Scotland began in 2006. It does not exist in isolation, but is part of an international movement to engage men in tackling violence against women, which began in Canada in 1991. Around the same time, actually, the City of Edinburgh Council ran the first Zero Tolerance campaign in the winter of 1992. The White Ribbon movement now exists in over 60 countries across the world, working with non-perpetrating men to tackle violence against women, recognising the important role that men have to play in tackling this social evil. Clearly, not all men are perpetrators of violence against women, but the White Ribbon campaign recognises that we live in a society where women do not have the same equality as men, and as a consequence of this inequality, many are victims of gendered violence. The White Ribbon Scotland campaign seeks to engage with men and boys to tackle violence against women by challenging the gender inequality which underpins it. And since 2006, White Ribbon Scotland has worked with local authorities, police departments and members of the general public to help them challenge sexist attitudes, reconsider their own behaviour and attitudes, and promote a healthy masculinity. In that time, some 2,200 members of the public have taken the online pledge to never commit, condone or remain silent about violence against women. And this year, White Ribbon Scotland has been working with local authorities and partner organisations in educational events across Scotland, and in particular, they've been working on secondary schools in Dundee, educating over 1,400 young people about the campaign and the link between negative attitudes and violence against women. The motion, which was laid before this Parliament is debated this evening, was timed to coincide with 16 days of action to tackle violence against women, being headed by White Ribbon Scotland. And I should note that my friend Bob Doris also lodged another motion before Parliament to mark this campaign as well. The 16 days began on the 25th of November and end on the 10th of December. Presiding Officer, these dates are neither incidental nor are they accidental. The 25th of November represents the International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and the 10th of December is, of course, International Human Rights Day, marking the signing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which was forged by the determined work of Eleanor Roosevelt, so famously described for this achievement as someone who would rather light a candle than curse the darkness. And the purpose of connecting these dates together to tie the International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women to International Human Rights Day is for people around the world to see human rights as a vital part, a vital component of the broad spectrum of human rights. Presiding Officer, the reality in modern Scotland suggests we desperately need to better focus our efforts on tackling the problem of violence against women. In Scotland, domestic abuse is sadly too prevalent, with an incident recorded every 10 minutes. White Ribbon Scotland suggests that 1 in 5 women experience domestic abuse in Scotland, and Zero Tolerance suggests that 1 in 4 women experience some form of violence or abuse. In 2011-12, domestic abuse incidences reported to the police rose by 7%, with nearly 60,000 in total, and 81% of these incidents were female victims with male perpetrators. And in the same year, reported incidents of rape rose by 19%. 100,000 children in Scotland experience domestic abuse, and as many as 1 in 3 young women have experienced dating abuse, and almost 1 in 4 14-year-olds have been forced to do something sexual by someone they're dating. Presiding Officer, as the father of a young daughter, I have to say that those statistics were particularly alarming to me. Changing attitudes towards this matter remain key in dealing with the problem. Research by the Centre for Research on Families and Relationships at the University of Edinburgh in 2011 found that young children justified men's violence against women using gender stereotypes and a rigid understanding of adult relationships. And the study found that young people subscribed to naturalised definitions of masculinity to explain rather than to question why men are violent. These ingrained views should be a source of worry to us all. We need to challenge them, to challenge violence against women. We need to start that work by supporting the work of the White Ribbon Campaign. I hope that this debate this evening can go some way to helping further that work.
Thank you very much. The debate is very tight. We're unable to extend this evening, so if members could take around 3 minutes, I might get everyone in. Otherwise, I may have to drop a member. I call Malcolm Chisholm to be followed by James Dornan.
Presiding Officer, I congratulate Jamie Hepburn on bringing forward this motion, which commends the work of those promoting awareness of the issue of violence against women and campaigning for an end to it. It is quite right to mention White Ribbon within that context, since clearly men are the problem in the sense that men cause the problem, and it is vitally important that men speak out on this issue. It goes without saying, however, that men must work with the leaders of this work, who are the women and the women-led organisations who have been working in this area since the 1970s. And I think it's important in these 16 days of action to remember that work. In 1976, for example, when Scottish Women's Aid was founded, there was a lack of public awareness and understanding of domestic abuse, and an undoubted failure by statutory agencies to respond appropriately. Much of the work done by Scottish Women's Aid was around awareness raising and getting domestic abuse onto the political agenda. I wanted to say more about that, but I'm conscious of having 3 minutes and already talking too fast. So can I also briefly mention the rape crisis centres, which started in the 1970s. Today there is a network of centres across Scotland that work to provide much needed support to those who experience rape and sexual assault, and to raise awareness and challenge myths. Again, activists and volunteers have driven much of the agenda around sexual violence. And the third organisation I want to mention is Zero Tolerance, who certainly had such a profound influence on me when they started in Edinburgh 20 years ago in 1992. I would like to say more on that, but since I have a motion with 53 signatures congratulating Zero Tolerance on their 20th anniversary and hope that that will be called for debate soon, I better desist from saying more about them. But I think it is very important that all the men involved work with those women's organisations who have led and continue to lead this work. I also think it's important that White Ribbon asks men the really hard questions in this area, asking men not just to condemn domestic abuse, which I hope the vast majority of men would do, but to understand that male privilege and power is at the heart of the problem. Domestic abuse and violence against women more generally are rooted in gender inequality. It is reflective of the unequal power relations that continue to exist between men and women, the unequal pay structures and working conditions that exist, and the value or lack of value that we place on women's roles in every way in everyday life. Male violence against women in that sense is a profound societal and cultural problem that is rooted in social relations rather than just the psychopathology of individual men. So White Ribbon should learn that lesson from the women's organisations I have mentioned. Thirdly, White Ribbon must ask men to reject all forms of abuse and exploitation, including some that are regarded by many as normal parts of masculinity, and, for example, attending lap dancing clubs, and many others could be referred to, which will probably be mentioned in the Zero Tolerance debate, which I hope will come soon, because that is the new frontier that Zero Tolerance is focusing on at present. In these 16 days of action, therefore, we should remember all the work that has been done, but most of all remember the thousands, the millions of women throughout the world who have suffered and continue to suffer from the unacceptable scourge of violence against women. I hope people will come to the Zero Tolerance event in this Parliament on Thursday night, and there are other events this week, such as the conference on Friday, which I'll attend, on rape and women's inequality.
Thank you very much. James Dornan, to be followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to start by congratulating my colleague Jamie Hepburn on bringing this debate to the Chamber, and of course the White Ribbon Campaign's 16 days of action. I'm sure that many of our elected representatives will be like myself and have had a number of cases through their doors where we've seen the victims of domestic abuse and abuse by men against women. And the victims aren't just the woman. Very often they're the children of the woman. The psychological carry-on fallout from the initial behaviour can be very long-lasting. We've seen, I see housing issues, health issues, schooling issues, all stemming from one act of just senseless violence. I'd like to talk about a couple of projects that go on in my constituency to help those who have been affected by this. The Domestic Abuse Project, founded in 2000, is an organisation dedicated to alleviating the suffering of women and their families who experience or who have experienced domestic abuse. Based in a local community centre, the service is provided in a low-key, easily accessible setting. Like many such organisations, it's run by a board of directors, all of whom are volunteers, with day-to-day support provided by a small team headed by a project manager. The project's ethos is that it helps its clients to make their own decisions which will enable them to live more safely. It does this by providing a community response to domestic abuse and working with the most appropriate partners, whether statutory agencies or other voluntary organisations, to find accommodation, provide a bridge to other services, provide a support and advocacy service, accompany them to appointments and carry out risk assessments and safety planning. Clients are offered assistance in this in the way that is most appropriate to them and their individual circumstances. That may be that information, advice and guidance, personal development, one-to-one support or small group work. An exciting development this year for the project has been a pilot project giving them the opportunity to provide a much-needed outreach and a one-to-one service that was identified as an unmet need. And in addition to working directly with the women who have experienced or are currently experiencing domestic abuse, the project also works to raise awareness of these issues through training and speaking to other groups and agencies, including the health service, housing and education. Over the past 3 years, the project has helped around 400 people to regain control of their lives. Many of the women who use the services go on to become involved in the local community through informal learning and volunteering opportunities, with some gaining full-time employment. The project also supports one of my favourite community organisations in Waves. Unfortunately, I wish there was no need for it, but the work it does is tremendous. It's a local peer support group, also based in Castlemilk. What it does, the women get together to discuss it, they take the families out on outings, but more importantly, it allows them to meet and chat in relaxed surroundings, which reduce isolation and aid the recovery process. Society still has a long way to go in dealing with violence against women, but until we get there, organisations such as DAP, Waves and others have a crucially important role to play in supporting these affected by this violence and helping them to move on from it in a positive way. I'd like to finish off by thanking again Jamie Hepburn for bringing this and the White Ribbon campaign, and wish them all the best in their campaign over the next 16 days and congratulate them for the continual good work in protecting women throughout Scotland.
Thank you. I now call Jackie Bailey to be followed by Dennis Robertson.
Can I also congratulate Jamie Hepburn on securing this debate? Almost half of the women in the UK experience domestic violence, sexual assault or stalking. Violence against women causes more deaths and disability among women aged 15 to 44 than cancer, malaria, traffic accidents and war. 2 women per week are killed as a result of domestic abuse. These are just some of the chilling statistics cited by the White Ribbon campaign that demonstrate the importance of the campaign today. And despite the efforts of the previous Scottish Executive, with groundbreaking and hard-hitting advertising campaigns, with very clear messages about there being no excuse for domestic abuse, and indeed the efforts of the current government, the numbers reporting abuse continue to rise. And we need to recognise that, as others have said, abuse of women is very much rooted in gender inequalities. This is fundamentally about differences in power between men and women. And we need to do more to prevent this happening, to change society's attitudes and to change values too. Tonight's debate, I think, recognises all of that, and the importance of the White Ribbon campaign has been outlined by Jamie, so I'm not going to go on about the significance of the 16 days. But let me just say, and repeat something he said, that women's rights are fundamentally about human rights and of concern to us all. We need to support and work with both the White Ribbon campaign, but with organisations like Zero Tolerance, Rape Crisis and Women's Aid to challenge all violence against women. And I do commend the campaign launched by Women's Aid, Together We Can Stop It, making real the stories that lie behind the statistics and challenging behaviours, but also helping give confidence to women to report incidents. And let me also acknowledge the responses from the police and the courts are constantly improving. I particularly want to highlight the significant contribution made to women's experience of the justice system with the success of the domestic abuse courts in Glasgow, rolled out to Edinburgh, and I believe a pilot in Livingston too. And can I commend the police on launching a nationwide festive campaign on tackling domestic abuse. I have to be honest and say I wish we didn't have to have all these campaigns, but we need to look at how we get them to contribute to the whole, which is about changing attitudes. Can I mention something that isn't often mentioned, Presiding Officer? That's the Forced Marriage Protection Order, agreed by this Parliament, I believe, if my memory is right, approaching its first anniversary. 2 orders taken out, 2 more pending, a small but important step for women. We need to be relentless in our pursuit of this issue. And I leave you with 2 thoughts. I think we need to focus on 2 fronts. Firstly, on services, because there is a continuing need, because in the last census, Scottish Women's Aid identified that 22 people who requested accommodation, their needs were met. That means 78% needs weren't met. So there is a continuing problem. And finally, changing attitudes of society, because we need to challenge gender inequality, and it's only really then, when you start to do that, that we make a sustained difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Dennis Robertson to be followed by Annabel Goldie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'll try to be brief. I certainly would like to congratulate Jamie Hepburn for bringing this debate to the Chamber this evening. Also commend Malcolm Chisholm for getting through his speech in such rapid way that was still legible. I could still understand every word he said, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, given the limited time, I'm not going to repeat what has already been said by other members, and can I say that I do agree, I think, with every sentiment that has come from the other members during this debate. Within Aberdeenshire, there are support mechanisms for women, and I'd like to speak about one in particular, which is the it's domestic against it's the something, Presiding Officer, I've just forgotten what it was now. It's domestic violence team in Aberdeenshire, and basically they're there to respond to people who actually contact them by phone, and they're willing to actually speak to people over the phone, or in fact arrange to meet them to discuss how best to get out of this dreadful situation that many women find themselves in. Presiding Officer, everyone has said it's about inequality, and it is. But it's about a culture change. Men do not have the right over women. Men do not have the right of control over women. And it's about high time that men acknowledge that. Men are really the perpetrators, but men, probably through the culture, maybe through education, through the masculinity, or maybe sport, etc., believe that they have this right, and they don't. Presiding Officer, we need to find ways to break down that culture. It's abhorrent. It shouldn't happen. Young children should never witness violence at home. Young children should never witness violence in the street, because most of it is against women. Presiding Officer, we've got a lot of work to do, but perhaps it's through education in the early days. We need to try and ensure that women do attain equality through gender. Presiding Officer, once again, can I just commend Jamie Hepburn and the other speakers for the comments they've made this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Annabel Goldie to be followed by Margaret McDougall.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I also congratulate Jamie Hepburn for bringing this important issue to the Chamber. Violence against women is unacceptable, it is abhorrent, and it has no place in Scotland. And the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and the 16 days of activism against gender violence demonstrate the solidarity of women around the world, and that is to be commended. As is White Ribbon Scotland, a campaign for men in Scotland who want to end violence against women. That campaign, part of the international campaign in over 55 countries, and that is the largest effort in the world of men who work to end violence against women. So well done, Jamie Hepburn, for getting this motion brought forward for debate. Because the statistics are depressing, Deputy Presiding Officer. In Scotland, there were nearly 60,000 incidents of domestic abuse recorded by the police in 2011-12. That's a 7% increase on 2010-11. And since 2002-03, there's been a 67% increase in recorded incidents of domestic abuse. There are currently 163 incidents of domestic abuse recorded by the police each day. And I noted from from one of the local papers in my area, the Kirkintilloch Herald, that more women are killed as a result of male violence than by car accidents, cancer, malaria and war combined. And I have to say that sort of drew me up short and shocked me. And then there are women who don't report crime. Women who believe it's a private family matter. We have to encourage them to believe it's nothing like that at all. They must have the courage to go forward and report such unacceptable behaviour. There are women who are frightened that reporting it may make it worse. We need to encourage them that the only thing that will make it worse is not reporting it. And when it is reported, it must be tackled. And it's vital that help is available for women fleeing violence, and I think we should recognise the valuable work that many voluntary groups do in this regard. Members have already paid tribute to some of these. Indeed, I've made very recent visits to organisations in my own area who do excellent work to support and protect women and children fleeing domestic abuse. My most recent visits were to Renfrewshire Women's Aid and Inverclyde Women's Aid, and they do fantastic work to support women and their families. And can I also pay tribute to Women's Support Project. Now, that is a feminist voluntary organisation recognised as a Scottish charity. The project works to raise awareness of the extent, causes and effect of male violence against women and for improved services for those affected by violence. So there is a lot of positive work going on out there. But of course, we must never forget the role of children. Again, some members have already alluded to this. Sadly, tragically, children are also victims. They're often present when incidents of abuse occur. I was delighted to learn in my visit to Inverclyde Women's Aid that they're running education classes in school about healthy relationships to try and reverse the trend of domestic abuse, to try and explain to children there is a different way that things can be done, there is a different way to lead life. I think, Deputy Presiding Officer, that domestic violence is a stain in Scotland. We must tackle it. We must encourage and support women to come forward, and we must support them when they do. And as Dennis Robertson said, we must change this pernicious culture because it is still out there. But I think, in all credit to Jamie Hepburn, this debate is testament to the political commitment in this chamber to provide that encouragement and that support.
Thank you. Call Margaret McDougall to be followed by Gil Park.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would also like to thank Jamie Hepburn for bringing this very important members' debate and highlighting the work of the White Ribbon Campaign. Domestic abuse can and does affect far too many women in Scotland, yet so many suffer in silence. Today we send a clear message that there is no place for domestic abuse. For 2 days last week, White Ribbon campaigners held a roadshow in the Rivergate Mall in Irvine to promote the 16 days of action. This was only one of the many events taking place in North Ayrshire. Irvine Rugby Club showed their support for the campaign before their game, and the majority of football clubs in North Ayrshire have also signed up to it. Over the next 2 weeks, there will be a workshop at Garnock Academy, displays of women's authors at all North Ayrshire libraries, and there will be a screening of an animation produced by local school pupils with support from North Ayrshire Women's Aid. The aim is to get young people, particularly young men, engaged in the campaign, while shedding light on the problem of domestic abuse. Worryingly, during 2011 in North Ayrshire, almost 2,000 incidents of domestic abuse were reported, making it one of the worst areas in the west of Scotland. It is hoped that these figures will reduce this year due to the preventative work that is being undertaken by the Domestic Abuse Task Force and a range of initiatives working with the White Ribbon Campaign and other organisations. Strathclyde Police is targeting offenders and delivering a programme of education which it hopes will change attitudes and alter behaviours and break that cycle of domestic violence in our area, where young people who have grown up seeing domestic abuse think this is the norm, and sadly, they then go on to be abusers too. That's why the White Ribbon Campaign is so important in reaching out to young people, to young men and boys, and having their role models setting them good examples and letting them know that violence against women is not acceptable in any situation. We also need to make sure support is there for those women who come forward, Recently, it was reported in Third Force News that 2 in 3 women were being turned away from refuge accommodation, and that funding at ground level is becoming increasingly stretched for these services, which are in high demand. Given that a report of domestic abuse is made every 10 minutes in Scotland, we cannot afford for these services to be underfunded, or, in all likelihood, women will not feel safe enough to come forward. Some progress has been made, but domestic abuse is still far too common in Scotland. We need to break the cycle through educating our children, raising awareness and promoting key services. I congratulate the work of White Ribbon Campaign, because we must rid Scotland of domestic abuse and let offenders know that it won't be tolerated.
Thank you. Call Gill-Paterson to be followed by Rhoda Grant.
My thanks also to Jamie Hepburn for bringing this debate tonight. Presiding Officer, can I declare an interest on this issue, as I'm a board member of Rape Crisis Central Scotland? One of my tasks over a good number of years has been to attempt, when possible, to send a message that violence or abuse by men against women, and indeed children, is unacceptable. I have endeavoured to particularly target male-dominated forums and institutions, highlighting the fact that this issue, being typically defined as women's issues, is a mile off the mark. I believe this, as 80% of this type of crime is committed by men over women, and in my book it is very much a man's problem, and the only ones who can remedy it is men by their actions. That's not to say or recognise or in any way minimise the important work carried out by women, over generations, in fact. I know from when I was growing up that matters such as men beating or abusing their wives were almost exclusively dealt with by women, who would, for the best part, have to do the vital support work very quietly and, in most cases, on their own, separate from men. It's taken the work of women in families or small extended groups at that time, non-supported from the public purse, to fight for women's rights to be protected from abusive men. Things have moved on since then, with substantial increases in the number of organisations who are campaigning in the interests of women, and I believe progress has been made in this regard. Where I think work is still needing to be done is in highlighting the issue further amongst the male population, as it remains, in my view, by and large outside of the mainstream consciousness of men. However, that being said, we are making progress, and I'm very pleased from my perspective that so many male members of this Parliament are speaking in this debate tonight. This issue crosses party political lines, and as parliamentarians, we all have the duty to do what we can to counter this as often as possible and highlight the immorality that is violence against women and children. I'm pleased that since the inception of the Scottish Parliament, each administration has adopted a strong approach to tackling this issue. In closing, my own message to men is simply: influence your male friends, spread the word across society that this is not a women's issue. It's a man's responsibility to stop what's going on.
Thank you very much. Rhoda Grant to be followed by Drew Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Firstly, I want to congratulate Jamie Hepburn on securing this very important debate, and also to pay tribute to the work of the White Ribbon campaign that is run to show that men will not condone violence against women. And like others in the Chamber, I believe we have come a long way to tackling violence against women. We've made much progress, and much of this has been done since this Parliament has taken on its devolved responsibilities. A lot of those responses have been driven by Scottish Women's Aid and other groups who have secured cross-party support for the progress, and I very much welcome how far we have come, although I must admit we have far to go. I hope we can build on this progress by criminalising the purchase of sex. Prostitution leads to vulnerable people, mostly women, being coerced to have sex in return for payment either in cash or kind. For the most part, people are coerced by poverty and the need for access to money, often single parents or those with drug and alcohol problems. But others are also coerced by abusive partners, pimps, and we see greater numbers of people being trafficked into our society. Young people coming out of care are a prime target for those that would profit from selling other human beings. Yet we criminalise the victims, while those who feed this industry by their demand get off scot-free. Those who would purchase sex need to understand the damage their behaviour causes. They can't buy consent. The impact of their actions is that many prostitutes suffer post-traumatic stress, mental health problems, not to mention the physical effects, which include assault and rape. It's unacceptable in a modern Scotland, and I hope we can build the same consensus and tackle this aspect of violence against women.
Thank you very much. And finally, I call Drew Smith.
I'm grateful, Presiding Officer. I wasn't sure if I would have the chance to be called in this debate, but I'm glad that you've hopefully managed to squeeze me in very briefly. In debating the issue of the media earlier on, in the juxtaposition of this debate, I was struck by the fact that in the Evening Times in Glasgow and in STV Glasgow and the online news, really a week will go by without seeing news of a violent attack in Glasgow city centre or somewhere around the city. Sometimes connected with prostitution, but often stranger attacks and a whole range of other incidents. And we can only guess at the number of women who live in fear of violence behind closed doors at home. Violence is a whole of society issue. It crosses class. And I was struck also when we talked about the debate we had around football and the impact of, or whether there is a connection between increases in domestic violence around football matches. I think we do need to remember that violence against women is something that happens in every section of our society and amongst groups of men that we perhaps might not suspect. And I think I'm also struck, of course, by the fact that the violent attack we've seen in Glasgow this week, where a man was raped in Glasgow. But we do need to remember 85% of domestic violence is committed by men upon women. So a proper effort to tackle domestic violence, I think, needs to be informed by a gender analysis. The truth is that violence against women exists in our society because too many of us tolerate it. It is important, as Gil Patterson rightly said, that so many of us are here in the Parliament tonight to make our views known. In my view, discrimination against women is a contributory factor in our toleration of men's violence against women, as is men's attitudes to sexualisation of women and girls. And we should be prepared to say clearly that sex is not a right and that men have no right to demand it, nor to seek it through violence or threat of violence. I'm also struck that today, I listened on the way in this morning to my colleague Kezia Dugdale on the radio discussing the issue of everyday sexism. And there is no doubt in my mind that there are connections between discrimination, how we view women and the image that we create for young girls, and the issues of violence in our society. And I met recently with John Carnican of the VRU, and he was impressed by some of what he was telling me around some of the international best practice that exists around encouraging men and other people in society, all of us in society, to interrupt violence or interrupt violent abuse where challenging it might be not directly possible. And I look forward to them bringing forward their ideas in their future work programme about how we might implement some of that in Scotland. In my view, violence against women by men is more than a symbol of societal sexism. Violence in our society, in homes and on our streets, is, as Gil Patterson says quite rightly, not just a women's issue, but it remains an issue in which a gendered analysis is absolutely vital. Real men neither hit nor tolerate other men to hit women, and I commend Jamie Hepburn, indeed all the other speakers in this debate, and thank you for the opportunity to take part in this debate, Presiding Officer.
Can I thank all members for their disciplined approach to time, which did allow me to call everyone, and I now call on the Cabinet Secretary to wind up the debate. Alec Neil, no more than 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I will try to be as disciplined as everybody else. Can I also join in congratulating Jamie Hepburn for organising this debate, and also the White Ribbon Campaign for their tremendous efforts, including in the Parliament today. Can I also welcome members of Women's Aid to the gallery this evening, and members from other organisations as well. I think this is one of these issues in which we are totally united as a Parliament, not just in terms of abhorring violence against women, but also in terms of our underlying analysis about how this is a gender-based problem, and fundamentally important to understanding it is the basic inequalities between men and women in our society. And a number of members, I've been in this Parliament now for 13 years, and the number of members who have spoken tonight have dedicated a lot of time and effort to the campaign, including yourself, Presiding Officer. So we're working together as a Parliament on this. It's not just a government versus Parliament issue, but we also have to work together with our key partners in the voluntary sector, in the local authorities, and in the police. Not just, I believe, to try to set an objective of reducing violence against women. Our objective should be to eliminate violence against women, although, as Rhoda Grant rightly said, we have a long way to go before achieving that objective. There are four particular ways in which the government is trying to tackle this issue. The first one is in educating our young people in particular to develop healthy relationships and equip themselves with the skills to challenge inappropriate behaviour when it occurs. And I think Drew Smith is absolutely right that we should challenge inappropriate behaviour at all times and all settings. Secondly, funding the Violence Reduction Unit to deliver the Mentors in Violence Prevention pilots. These encourage young people to take a stand against harassment, abuse and violence, and we are giving £20,000 to help roll out the project in 2012 and again in 2013. Thirdly, implementing the legislation to provide protection for victims. For example, the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2011, which came into force in July 2011, and the Forced Marriages Protection and Jurisdiction Act 2011, which I had the pleasure, if it is a pleasure, of piloting it through the Parliament. It shouldn't be a legislation we should need in the 21st century, but we do, and that provides protection for women who are at risk from forced marriage and the violence often associated with it. And as Jackie Bailey rightly pointed out, we now have an order under the Forced Marriages Act, and we are tackling that issue. And finally, supporting the continued work of those promoting awareness of this issue and campaigning for an end to violence against women. And as Malcolm Chisholm and Gil Patterson and others have mentioned, organisations like Scottish Women's Aid, local aid groups as well as the rape crisis centres are absolutely vital to this. And can I say, in this day of cuts, when we have to make cuts, I've been doing my best, and my predecessor Nicola Sturgeon did her best to try to protect this particular budget. It's a fairly modest budget anyway, and I hope all the local authorities in Scotland, no matter what their political persuasion, will not see this as an easy activity to reduce funding for, because it is so essential. And in fact, to reduce funding on it in many ways is cutting your nose to spite your face, because if you reduce funding for, say, women's aid groups, you end up actually with a far bigger bill to pay in other budgets, because you're not taking the measures necessary up front to protect women. Can I turn to the 16 days of activism against gender violence? And it's an appropriate opportunity to recognise the violation of human rights of women, which is at the heart of this campaign. The government fully supports the White Ribbon campaign, which, as Jamie said, has grown from its roots in Canada to be an international education and awareness-raising initiative, engaging men in a positive way to take action on an issue that has traditionally been seen as a woman's concern. And white ribbons are proudly worn by many, including myself, today. We have provided funding of £180,000 for the period 2012-15, specifically for White Ribbon Scotland, and I'm proud of the fact that we're doing that. Funding for the work to address violence against women more generally has been maintained at £34.5 million, which is a 62% increase on times before. That's not a party political point, it's just simply a commitment by the Parliament, totally supported by all the parties, to, in these times of austerity, to continue to fund these essential services. At the end of the day, Presiding Officer, it really is not about money primarily. It's about attitude, it's about culture, it's about men behaving well towards women. There is absolutely no excuse for any violence against any woman by any man anywhere. And I think that's a united and determined message we've got from this debate, from the Parliament of Scotland to the people of Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes Jamie Hepburn's Members' Business White Ribbon Campaign 16 Days of Action to Tackle Violence Against Women, and I now close this meeting of Parliament.